Hello and welcome to Security Panel, brought to you by Celerity, the show that covers all the big topics in the world of cybersecurity. I'm your host, Andrew McLean, and in this week's episode, we'll be taking a look at how organizations can improve their supply chain security by plugging the gaps. But I'm not going to do it alone. To help me discuss these issues, we have cybersecurity technical architect at Celerity, Steve Laidler, and his colleague, BDM Maggie Sutcliffe. But first, let's take a look at some of the recent cybersecurity stories grabbing the headlines over the past few weeks. And first up in the news, hackers have been spotted using Morse code in phishing attacks to evade detection. Microsoft discovered a phishing campaign where threat actors tried their best to cover their tracks by changing their obfuscation and encryption mechanisms over 37 days on average and using Morse code. Microsoft also noted that the campaign had undergone 10 iterations since July 2020. Elsewhere, holes-worn malware exploits unpatched Windows and Linux servers. By leveraging more than 20 known vulnerabilities in Linux and Windows servers, the holes-worn malware has been able to break into more than 1,000 cloud hosts since just June. This malware is so successful that people are referring to it as the king of vulnerability exploitation. And in other news, Microsoft Print nightmare vulnerability is making the news again as multiple ransomware gangs are using the vulnerability to try and steal and encrypt victims' data. There have been multiple reports from security researchers who have found evidence of these attacks taking place. Make sure you get patched. Now, let's get on with the show, starting with how supply chain attacks work. Steve, I'm going to start with you. Can you take us through a typical supply chain attack and the risks that they pose?
Yeah, sure. So if we take a typical supply chain attack, an attacker is going to be looking to get into some upstream, downstream, whatever you want to call it, supplier to basically take advantage of the fact that it's not the target. In theory, the target may not see this coming, or will be, less prepared from that kind of example. Certainly, if we use some of the common the ones that have happened recently, the attacker will breach some sort of service provider. Maybe some sort of portal or possibly some sort of software platform that organizations are using. Maybe it's a software distribution platform. They will target that because actually what they want to do is they want to get to the customers at the end of it. And by breaching that software distribution platform, they then gain access to be able to push out some sort of malicious software patch. Possibly even push out the ransomware or something like that itself, package it up as a distributable piece of software, and then use the platform to then push it down to either MSPs who are consuming that platform or directly to the end customers who are consuming it. And effectively the systems that it then targets will then install that patch or install that software, and then the attackers can then have direct access to those systems that are on the target organizations and access them directly. And really, then they can then either further move laterally to gain further and greater access to even more computer systems or networks, or effectively detonate some ransomware, exfiltrate some data, whatever they choose to do at that point, whatever their aims are. Can then be taken advantage of, and that is certainly how the likes of Kaseya, the SolarWinds attacks, etc. They've executed, and a lot more technical detail, I'm sure, in there.
And Maggie, from your experience, do you think supply chain attacks are a major worry for organizations?
It's certainly a growing concern. However, I think does possibly warrant greater attention. How far up the risk ladder this will be for organisations will very much depend on their awareness of this type of attack, or whether they've maybe had a near miss in the past. Supply chain attacks absolutely should be a concern for any organisation. As we've alluded to, this type of attack does absolutely not discriminate, and any industry is vulnerable and potentially at risk. The ethos, again, as we've touched upon around cybersecurity, is often based around trust. We know, for example, to take care when opening emails received from unexpected sources, but maybe we're less vigilant around those that we know well. And supply chain attacks rely very much upon the trust that organisations have with their vendors and suppliers. Often these relationships have built up over many, many years, and there maybe hasn't been the need to raise questions, or maybe not a present awareness of that. And the ability for cyber criminals to exploit that trust. So, in answer to your question, I think awareness of these attacks, supply chain attacks, is very much growing, but it is an attack type which possibly warrants further attention and a greater understanding.
So let's talk a bit about plugging these security gaps. So, Steve, what is the first step organisations need to take when trying to plug their security gaps?
It's really, as Maggie said earlier on, it's a multi-step approach or a defence in depth strategy. So there is that, sort of process and procedure element side of things. Making sure that suppliers understand their responsibilities from a security perspective. Making sure that security is at the forefront across the supply chain, because really any gap in the supply chain, could be exploited and undermines the whole security. And also adding more suppliers exponentially increases the risk factor of the supply chain. So I think understanding that from an awareness perspective is one of the most important things. And then really it's bringing the technology to bear once you've got a good understanding of what you need to protect. So understanding vulnerabilities that are present. And as Maggie said, doing all the basics right. In other words, making sure everything's patched, making sure that you're using concepts such as least privileged, so systems, people, etc., only have access to the information that they really need access to do their jobs, and that things are monitored at the ingress and egress points of the network. And just really keeping that a continuous watch on the environment and the iterative improvement. Keep improving things, and testing the security regularly. Pen tests are fairly good for that sort of thing, but they're a one shot snapshot at that point in time of what the security looks like, and there really needs to be a bit more of a continuous evaluation of that.
Ransomware. Ransomware was involved in a recent high-profile supply chain attack. But how can organisations reduce this risk?
So as Steve's alluded to there, obviously, it's very much a case of looking at this from a holistic viewpoint, starting with the basics of making sure that your vulnerabilities are firstly identified and they're mitigated, that gaps in your security controls, again, you have visibility of these, and allowing the opportunity to mitigate that risk. I think the other aspect as well, which is very important, not necessarily from the front end point of view, but very much looking at the back end. Organisations can take steps to ensure that their data is their critical data is fully protected in the event of a cyber attack. Whilst air gap ensures backups are separated from the production environment, there is still a risk of insider threats, and ideally organisations should explore solutions or services which provide immutability, meaning that once data is written, it cannot be altered in any way. Not all data needs to be immutable. Organisations should really think and consider the data which they absolutely cannot live without in the event of the worst happening and a cyber attack being successful. So they're crown jewels, so to speak. And building upon this, organisations should have plans and facilities in place to recover that data safely. So ensuring the data is scanned and clean before being brought back into production. And the other thing to consider as well, is very much around the time to recover from a cyber attack should also be taken into account, and organisations should consider what this time frame might look like for them, and realistically how their current cyber recovery solution would achieve this. So it's not just looking at, to answer your question, not just looking at the front end security, but also looking at how you can protect your data should the worst happen at the back end as well.
I think also there's that stopping the ransomware getting a foothold in the first place. So good endpoint protection, etc. Good visibility of the threat starting. So whether that's putting something like a SIM in place, like IBM's QRadar, or the Cloud Pak for Security, as it is these days. Having something like that in place where you can gain visibility of threats as they're emerging and as they're developing, and then be able to bring the threat intelligence to bear. So you can do some forensics, some intelligence on that that information as it's emerging, and then having the response to then available to then respond to those threats in a timely and automated fashion as well. I think that's also important, and being able to see threats across the landscape. So using data discovery tools, etc., to then be able to if I can see that on a particular system, where else might that be happening as well? So in other words, if particular characteristics or indicators of compromise are occurring, where else might I find those across the estate? So bringing advanced tools like that to bear as well will also help to reduce the risk of not just ransomware, but pretty much any style of attack.
So how is Celerity helping customers plug their supply chain security gaps?
I think in a number of different areas. Obviously, because I think security is such is really a people process technology thing. We help with certainly the awareness side of things. Simulated phishing platforms and services that we have to help users understand the kinds of attacks that could be coming into their inboxes, and to help them train in those kinds of areas. We also have our capabilities for testing, security from the vulnerability side of things, and also simulated cyber attacks. So we can test the security controls that organizations have in place with our Cyber Threat Insight service, so we start to give that visibility to the end users and the customers about what potential gaps they have within their security, how far through the organization a particular threat might spread in a simulated fashion, to see what might be discoverable if an attacker moved laterally through their environments, and also really from the monitoring side of things. So that SIM as a service piece as well. Powered by QRadar, which really it looks for those small threats that are starting to develop, and then pieces them together into the much larger, more aggressive threat that really is happening within an organisation, and then further on into that CP4S piece. So that automated response and threat intelligence that then gets dragged in to give even better detection and response capabilities as well.
I think something I'd just add to that, Steve, and jumping back to the gaining the visibility and awareness of the current gaps in security controls and vulnerabilities. What we absolutely do help customers with is understand what areas of their environment they may be weakest, where they require further resource or funding or attention, and that's really helping our customers to have those conversations internally with the wider business, and ensure that they have the support they need to improve on those areas as well.
And I think, and also just as you mentioned there's also that if the worst does happen, because then there is that ability for immutable backups, etc., and air gap backups. There is always the potential that the backups could be tampered with. You may be backing up data that actually already has been tampered with, or maybe have backdoors, etc., that are part of them. One of the first things attackers will do is they'll try and maintain persistence within the environment. So you could be backing up backdoors that they have created. So having that air gap backup that does span a decent amount of time, that you can then recover and cannot be deleted or removed, gives you a better chance then of recovering a good clean backup that you can restore without having to then resort to paying ransoms, etc.
And of course, I've got to ask, do you have any advice for organizations watching?
I think really it is that awareness piece. Be aware of your supply chains. Be aware of how you're connected. Be aware of the information that's flowing backwards and forwards between suppliers and yourselves, and really take steps and measures to mitigate the risk that kind of scenario poses. There will be technology that is in place. I think the Ponemon Institute did a survey, and I think it's something like around about 60% of people or organizations make changes on a regular, daily or weekly basis, but only around 20% actually test them. So without, what it says is people are making changes, not making sure that the changes that they've made are, correct. And therefore there are potential gaps there that could be exploited. So, make sure that any changes you made are tested on a regular basis, and also that a lot of misconfiguration is quite high in the exploitable sort of the methods that somebody will use is if there is a misconfiguration there, somebody could take advantage of it.
And that's all we've got time for in this episode of Security Panel. My special thanks to Steve and Maggie. Remember to join us next time for more Security Panel. And as always, talk to Celerity for your cybersecurity needs. Until next time, stay secure.